Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. God of War is almost here and perhaps it will be out by the time this video is released. Anyway, I made a mission to play through Bayonetta 3 as thoroughly and as fast as I possibly could. It's been quite a while now that we've been waiting for Bayonetta to return, and it's basically been since its last outing back in 2014, which was released on the Wii U. Since then, it's been radio silence. In the meantime, Platinum Games have released quite a few notable games, such as the beloved Nier Automata, which came out in 2017. This is a game that constantly reinvents itself within a playthrough, and then after completing a playthrough. Honestly, it's a game that made waves in the games industry. As well, they developed Astral Chain on Nintendo Switch, another action-adventure game that garnered widespread critical acclaim. But since then, it's been rough times for Platinum Games. Earlier this year, they released Babylon's Fall, a live service action role-playing game that was basically dead on arrival. It received overwhelmingly negative reviews and bombed commercially. After 6 months, Square Enix announced that the game servers would shut down in February 2023. It was short-lived, and it put in question the future of Platinum Games. Though luckily, Bayonetta, as always, is here to save the day. I guess the first thing worth mentioning is just how outstanding the presentation is in Bayonetta 3. From the opening credits, you know you're in for an incredibly groovy and stylish ride. I absolutely adore how they integrated the credits in the environment during the cinematic for the prologue. It is such a Bayonetta thing to do. And honestly, even these intro credits is exactly the perfect taste of what is to come. The game is absurd. Everything about it is cranked way past 11. The game is chock full of over-the-top set pieces and loaded with numerous epic boss battles throughout its roughly 14-hour campaign. Just the prologue chapter on its own outclasses the climax of most AAA games. I wish I were exaggerating. Bayonetta puts the competition to shame with its spectacle along with its expert fight choreography. The combat in this game is some of the absolute best you'll find in gaming today. It's easy to get into and button mash through for the casual audience, but incredibly deep and satisfying for the dedicated player. There's a dizzying amount of depth to be found, as well as a plethora of optional challenges to be found, as we've seen in previous games. There is no way you're going to master everything on a single playthrough. There are just too many playstyles to digest. Without going too much into detail, there are two major iterations on the combat of Bayonetta 3. The first would be the summons. I love their design. It's creative, they look beautiful, and are fun as hell to use, especially as combo finishers. However, I do have a few issues with them, as much as I do love them. I'm really not a fan of how much space they take on screen. Shit, they often take up the whole entire screen. Good luck getting those perfect dodges. As well, I find them really clumsy to manipulating the environment if you choose to control them. So truly, they are their best as combo finishers. Additionally, the design of the weapons are insanely creative and once again, fun as hell to use. I can't tell you just how much fun it is to play this game. Truly some of the most outlandish weapon designs I've ever seen of any game ever. Holy crap. I will not spoil the surprise, but good lord, Bayonetta 3 absolutely blows the competition out of the water with their unique and batshit crazy weapon design. Unless you've been spoiled, you'll never guess in a million years what you'll be using as a weapon. Honestly, my highest praise to the developers that worked on this. And apart from the combat itself, there's just so much about this game that just adds to the grandiose spectacle. First of all, the scale of the events on screen are massive. There are some truly mind-blowing chase sequences with dynamic environments and elements that are raging in the background. It is exhilarating. It's also wild just how many different gameplay twists the game throws at you. Oh my god. Of course, I'm not going to spoil any of the fun and surprises for you. But much like the weapon design, you are not going to see it coming. And frankly, I'm astounded that the Nintendo Switch simply doesn't explode under the weight of Bayonetta's boot heel. This game is pushing the Switch to its absolute limit and still manages to run quite smoothly, even with all the chaos and dynamics on the screen. It's impressive, no doubt, but unfortunately this also highlights some of the game's biggest flaws. World building is by far the weakest aspect of the game, and it's a shame because there's a lot of potential that I feel the developer just weren't able to capitalize on. This is probably in large part due to the hardware limitations. Some of the graphical elements are really starting to show their age here. We see some very last-gen level art at times, and some of the character models have very uncanny looks in their faces. I'm specifically referring to some of the NPCs we see in the prologue chapter, for example. And don't get me wrong, I think aesthetics are far more important than graphics. But it does feel like Bayonetta 3 smashes into a brick wall here. And this makes me wonder how The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom will fare come next year. Already in Breath of the Wild, which is back in 2017, that game was sucking every drop of power from the Nintendo Switch console. We all remember the frame rate drops in numerous areas of the game. By all means, Nintendo, show me your technical wizardry and prove me wrong on all accounts. I will happily eat my hat if that comes the case. But nonetheless, this is a bit of a red flag, and I'm going to, well, we'll see what happens. Anyway, putting that aside, the exploration sections are also weakened due to their inferior navigation 3Cs. Perfect controls for combat, but for exploration, not so much. In my opinion, it feels very clumsy. In combat, you're a precision tool of masterly level, but the navigation feels frustrating, even with some of the summons that undoubtedly help the platforming puzzles sprinkled throughout the game. And while I'm mentioning that, I really gotta say, the summons, not only are they used for combat, but even they add cool navigation ideas. Honestly, I think it's an interesting concept, but for the platforming puzzles, I don't think it works that great. But I think my biggest complaint about the game is that it feels exactly like the last two games. Don't get me wrong, once again, phenomenal execution on the gameplay. But structurally, it's basically a carbon copy of that same structure since, well, 2009 with the original game. I feel like the technical limitations really start hurting the game here, because I feel like the developers really want to go for some minor open world elements. The ingredients are there, but they feel abandoned and left hollow. Instead, we are left with the same old 100% linear style of level design. And by no means do I think for a game to evolve, it must go the open world route. Not at all. It's just that I smell this unrealized potential that I feel is there. I'll be very curious to see some behind the scenes footage in the near future that would perhaps confirm these suspicions. More on the old generation feeling, the levels are filled with collectibles, often breadcrumbing the way forward. Now, it's not an insulting design choice by any means, but it is rather old hat and reminds me of the coins you pick up in Mario games. Personally, it feels like a band-aid on an orientation issue where, as a player, you don't know where to go next. They've also conveniently added a button to redirect you and add a marker on the screen of where to go and how far it is. It's a crutch they rely on rather than finding an elegant level design solution or through visual composition in the level to guide the player forward. Finally, the story is all over the place. It's crazy, it makes no sense, but undeniably it has its own charm. And honestly, at this point, we've kind of come to expect this from Bayonetta games. They've made their reputation on that. So really, at this point, who cares? If you're here for a deep story, get ready to be disappointed and have your hair blown back by this crazy roller coaster ride through a multiverse of madness. And yes, the multiverse is beginning to risk overstaying its welcome nowadays, but luckily the cast does a pretty commendable job in voice acting. And I gotta say, I appreciate the addition of Viola in this iteration of the franchise. She adds some interesting wrinkles to both gameplay and narrative. But as always, the star of the show is Bayonetta herself. Her poise and sassiness are without peer. The new voice actress Jennifer Hale perfectly fills her shoes. Honestly, I wouldn't have even noticed the difference if I hadn't heard about the Helena Taylor drama beforehand, which makes this the ideal moment to address the elephant in the room. It is unfortunate that Helena Taylor wasn't forthright about how much she was paid, because I think if she made the exact same argument just with honest values, everyone would have agreed that yes, the lead voice actor for the third installment of a celebrated series should be paid more than the chump change she was offered. Especially when we compare to every other entertainment field outside of video games, the injustice becomes all the more apparent. It's the moral thing to do, and talent should always be rewarded. It's also genuinely sad to see that basically a lot of voice actors aren't surprised by these price ranges, so clearly this is a systemic thing. I believe that there should be a complete reevaluation in the games industry on compensation for voice actors and for the developers working deep in the trenches. I'm optimistic that it will happen. Lord knows the game industry has still a lot of growing up to do, as we all do as humans on this earth. I just pray that this won't tarnish the talks to improve pay and work-life conditions for game developers, because it did leave a bit of a stain. I also wasn't a fan of boycotting the game as Helena suggested, because that means that all developers of that game that gave their blood, sweat, and tears will go unrewarded. I mean, if that's the case, we should just be consistent and boycott every single game under the sun that releases with any voice acting whatsoever, because once again, this is a systemic thing. This isn't unique to Bayonetta 3. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that just doesn't sound like a particularly constructive or useful way of solving the problem. So yes, there absolutely is a discussion that must happen that leads towards better compensation for voice actors, but let's not sacrifice the developers in the process. Because frankly, the folks at Platinum Games made an overwhelming gaming experience that rivals with some of the best action games in recent years. It's so vibrant, flashy, and exotic. Frankly, I feel like I overdosed on the potent flavor of Bayonetta 3. And I'm not complaining, though I do feel that the game is reaching its limits technically and creatively as far as some structural elements go. It's still an incredibly solid entry in the franchise. I'm giving Bayonetta 3 an 8.5 out of 10. If you're looking for a badass action game that is loaded to the brim with exciting gameplay and epic boss battles, look no further. This is it. Incidentally, this may also be the best Switch game of the year. However, now that I say that, I am thinking of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 and that Mario Rabbids game. What was it called? Sparks of Hope? Yeah, which honestly look amazing, but regrettably, I really don't think I'm gonna have the time for this, especially for a 150-hour epic RPG. Unless by some miracle I learned to just soul split and to tackle games and life and all sorts of things at the same time in a relatively near future. Which somehow I don't think is gonna happen, but hey, I'm all ears. Anyway, that is all for today. As always, wishing you nothing but the best, lots of love, health, and happiness. Take care and talk to you very soon.